Hello everyone! This is a special ASMR video. It's to say thank you that I have begun my Patreon page and I've already had 2 donors, and this is a special extra just for them. And so Callum and Duke, thank you for your support. Everyone else, the more you support, the more videos I'm able to make. And this is a special video if you just want something to listen to in the background that's soft and relaxing. And you'll see that it's going to be ongoing. I am going to read the entirety of The Hobbit. Now, I'm not going to do it all in this reading, but I'm going to do it in a series. And this is a special thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, and all of the rest of you get to enjoy it as well, so thank you. Now, I have to tell you something. When I was in high school, I saw an early printing of The Hobbit, and it was this version, and I was entranced, and I bought it. And I had it for many, many years, and I read it to my daughter. This very version right here. And one day, my beautiful dog, Thea, ate it. She ate the entire thing, and I came in with her sitting over the corpse of my book. And I was devastated. And as a special surprise to me this Christmas, my wife bought me the same version so that I could have it again. And I thought it would be really nice if I could read it to you. So I want you to sit back, I want you to relax. If you're looking for a video that's just soothing, relaxing sounds, that's what this is going to be. So, without any further ado, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with inns of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall, like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight, into the side of the hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on the other. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of those. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set, round windows looking over his garden and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. The hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. you could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes, because their feet grow naturally leathery soles and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly, have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now, you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, that is, was a famous belladonna took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said, in other families, that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill, or over the hill, or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. That chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described to you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance, one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, where there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard a very little of all there is to hear, you would have been prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down the way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend, the old Took, died. In fact, and the hobbits had forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own, since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down to his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out from under the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning, whether I want it or not, or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time for blowing smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so in these parts. We are a plain, quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out an even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean to get rid of me, and it won't be a good morning until I shove off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door." Gandalf, good gracious me, not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man who used to make such particularly excellent fireworks? I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and labdrums on fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe, also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf who was responsible for quite so many lads and lasses going off into the blue on mad adventures? Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores? Bless me, life used to be quieter, you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business." "Where else would I be?" said the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I shall give you what you asked for."
I beg your pardon. I haven't asked for anything."
"Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too, very likely, if you ever get over it."
"Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning, but please come to tea. Any time you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye."
And with that the hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards are wizards, after all.
"What on earth did I ask him to tea for?" he said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly, and after a while he stepped up and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down in his engagement tablet like this: Gandalf, tea, Wednesday. Yesterday he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front door bell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two, and he ran to the door. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf, with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and said, "Dwalin, at your service," with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins at yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I am just about to make tea. Pray, come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly.
"And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung things up in your hall without a word of explanation?"
They had not been at table long. In fact, he had hardly reached for the third cake when there came an even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the hobbit. Off he went to the door. "So you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time. But it was not Gandalf. Instead, it was a very old-looking dwarf on the step, with a white beard and a scarlet hood. He, too, hopped inside as soon as the door was opened, just as if he had been invited.
"I see they have begun to arrive already," he said, when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up.
He hung his red one next to it and said,
"Balin, at your service."
And he said with his hand on his breast. Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and that he, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful he might have to go without. "Come along in and have some tea," he managed to say after a deep breath.
"A little beer would suit me better, if that's all the same with you, my good sir," said Balin, with a white beard. "But I don't mind cake. Seed cake, if you have any."
Lots," Bilbo found himself answering to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes that he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them when a loud ring came at the bell again. And another ring! Gandalf for certain this time, he thought as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carrying a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped. As soon as the door began to open, Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "Keely, at your service," said one. "And Feely," said the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bows. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin are here already, I see," said Keely. "Let us join the throng." "Throng," thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarves sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and trouble with the goblins and about the depredations of dragons and lots of other things he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous, when ding-dong-a-ling-a-ding, his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Somebody at the door," he said, blinking. "Some 4, I should say, by the sound," said Feely. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang even louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all. It was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wondering in the hall, and he had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service." One after the other, Dory, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Glowin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth, and the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, and then there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging on it with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry and altogether bewildered and bewuthered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep your friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop-gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofer, Bomber, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Bifur, Bofer, Bomber, standing in a row, and they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky-blue one with long silver tassel. This at last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mats, with Bifur, Bofer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that he at last grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now that we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods and the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs, "quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the late-comers to eat and drink. Oh, what's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Bifur. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofur. "And pork pie and salad," said Bombur. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs to the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know more about the inside of my larders than I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed and beginning to wonder whether this most wretched adventure had not come into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confusticate and bebother these dwarves," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit, his appetite quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will all be staying to supper?" he said in his politest, unpressing tones.
"Of course," said Thorin, "and after. We shan't be getting through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up."
Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top with one hand, while the hobbit ran after, almost squeaking in fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. "Chip the glass and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bent the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggin hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the flat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wines on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pour them, pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you're finished, if there's any hole, send them down the hall with a roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully, carefully with the plates." And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. When they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fenders smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke rings would go green and come back and hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about already. In the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watching. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill.
"Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments."
Kili and Fili rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori and Nori and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere in their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Bofur went out too, and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They went back and came back with violas as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it with music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else.
and was swept away into dark lands under strange mountains, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened up into the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one, then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of the ancient homes, and this was like a fragment of their song, if it can be like a song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to see the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the falls. For ancient king and elvish lord, their many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire, in twisted wire they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. They lay there long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. Then dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, the dwarves they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our hearts and gold from him. As they sat, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hand, and by the cunning and the magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire at the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up inside of him, and he wished to go and to see the mountains, and to hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the tree. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up,
probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End under Hill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they had all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark.
"Where are you going?"
said Thorin in a tone that seemed to show that he had guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically.
"We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Dark for dark business.
There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat down in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash.
"Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak."
And this is how Thorin began. We're going to stop there for now, but we're going to continue this series. Again, this is in thanks to my wonderful Patreon donors. Consider becoming a Patreon donor yourself. You will help support me and help to create more of these. And we'll get to the next part of The Hobbit on the next series. You take care, and I'll talk to you soon.